Alright, so my name is Juan Esparza, and I'll be recording the life story of. And is there a certain name you would like
Yeah,
to go by?
Cindy. You can just call me Cindy.
Just Cindy?
Cindy.
Alright. And we'll be recording the life story of Cindy. This recording is happening on June 25th of 2019. We are recording in Fresno, California. And you said your name is Cindy. May I also get your
Yeah,
age?
my name is Cindy Lou Williams. I am 65 years old this month. I was born in 1954. So,
Alright. And how would you identify yourself?
as a gay woman,
Alright.
she is my pronoun. She. I'm kind of a little uncomfortable with that because my upbringing didn't really come up with that, but I've always identified as a gay woman, not specifically as a lesbian.
Alright.
I always felt that gay was inclusive, whereas lesbian was kind of a division. So, I don't know. Just a preference.
Not a problem.
Anyway, so.
Alright. So let's start off with some basic questions really quick. So have you always lived in Fresno?
No, I moved to Fresno permanently in 1979. However, my family were farmers on the west side, which in Fresno that means Crothers, Kerman, that area, in the 30s and 40s. So I knew I had deep roots in Fresno that I really didn't know when I moved here. I mean, I knew I did, but I wasn't really connected to those roots. It just so happened that I stopped in Fresno to visit a friend on my way to Humboldt State and never made it to Humboldt State.
Oh wow. What were you going to Humboldt State for?
To go to school.
Oh, to go to school.
Yeah, at some point I wanted to be an architect in those days. That was in 1978, 78. And I sort of came to Fresno and was staying with a friend. One of my former roommates, he moved to Fresno. And so I stayed with him for several weeks and sort of kind of got absorbed into the Fresno gay community at that time. And that was in 78.
In 78?
Yeah.
Alright. And what would you say was going around the gay community in 1978 that you found yourself so connected to?
Well, that was in the very, very beginnings of the birth of a lot of the organizations that you see today. Happened like maybe 90, 70, I want to say 79 was kind of the end of 79. I had been coming to Fresno. I lived in Porterville at the time. And I had been coming to Fresno on the weekend to visit my friend who had moved here. And we would go to the bars, you know, your typical bar disco scene in the 70s. And we lived walking distance to what is now called, or was, the Circle at the time in 79. When I say walking distance, I mean 3 blocks. So if I had too much to drink, I could just walk home. I didn't drive.
All right. Well, that's good.
And it was in this area of which my home is at right now, because I just lived right over here on Shields and.
Oh well, that's pretty close then.
Yeah, and you know where Legends is at now.
Yes.
That was a restaurant at the time in the 70s, but the North Tower Circle was on the corner of, I think it's on the corner of Princeton and Weber, not Princeton and Weber, Princeton and Maroa. Yeah, Princeton and Maroa. So 3 blocks. And in those days, you know, we danced till we dropped, and we drank till we dropped, and we, you know, sort of the party scene. But I came up here to visit my friend, and he took me to a dignity meeting because he was Catholic and I was Catholic. And Dignity in the 70s was a gay organization for gay Catholics to reconnect with the church. And we went to a potluck. And I showed you the picture of Tom, my friend Tom
Yes.
Fierro. He was the first person that I ever met in 1979. He's the person I've known the longest in this town. He's our 18th Empress, but him and his partner at the time was also named Tom, so it was Tom and Tom. I went to a party, to a potluck at their home, and met other gay Catholics. I believe I was one of 2 women in the place at the time, but that never bothered me because I always felt more comfortable around men than I did around women.
Okay.
So that comes from my military background, not so much from my being gay or lesbian or whatever.
That's all.
But that was in '78. So then I eventually ended up moving here, and I eventually ended up at City College, and I eventually ended up being the facilitator. In those days, there weren't really presidents, but the facilitator for the Gay People's Union at Fresno State. But that didn't happen until a little bit later. But I was involved, and I knew all of those people that were involved in the very, very birth of the gay community in this town, because you had 2 places to go. You went to potlucks at people's houses, or you went to the bars. And in those days, there were 4 main bars in Fresno. There was the Red Lantern. It was on Belmont, still on Belmont. There was the Palace, which was on Belmont, but I believe is no longer there. And then there was the Circle, which is right here on Princeton and Moreau. So it was a dance club. The other 2 were bars you drank in or played pool in, but you danced till you dropped at the Circle. So.
What was your drink of choice?
My drink of choice? I am ashamed to say that in those days I drank something called Alexander, which was a blended chocolate drink, sweet as hell, and give you the worst hangover. I have since wised up in my many years, and I've been a bourbon drinker for a very, very long time. But yeah, in those days it was the sweeter the drink, the better, because I really didn't like alcohol that much. So.
Yeah, it takes a while.
It takes a while, yeah. But I'm actually a bourbon drinker, single barrel now. So.
All right. I don't think I've had bourbon before.
Made in Kentucky, very good, American, very American, and that's a big deal for me. So.
All right. At what age would you say you was it that you started to realize that you might be a gay woman?
When I was in high school, I guess I kind of need to preface this with, I come from a family of 4 boys and 2 girls. I am the second child. So I have 4 brothers, and then my sister is like the youngest of the twins. She's a twin, and so they're the youngest. But I grew up in a military household. My father was retired. My father is retired military, or was retired military. My father was in the military at the time when I was born in Sacramento. But I was raised with us moving a lot of places because my father was in the military. And so we were stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California. We lived in Vacaville. And I was going to high school at Vacaville High School. And I had my very first girlfriend. I was a sophomore in high school. My very first crush. A lot of times you'll hear women talk about their first crushes. The other person doesn't know that they have this crush. This person and I, we knew we had this crush. However, my best friend was a senior in high school that year. And lots of things kind of happened, but he ended up taking her to prom, and I ended up losing a girlfriend. Probably I was all of 15 at the time. And I knew I was different, but I didn't have a name for it, and I didn't really have. Um, I would say that I was in that tomboy category, but I was in that category because I wasn't really a girly girl. My sister was the girly girl, and we call her the beauty queen. But I was the can fix anything kind of thing because I was around my dad. My dad was my hero. He's a Vietnam veteran. He has a a flying silver star from Vietnam. So and that was about the time that he was in Vietnam. Was right in that in 1970. He went to Vietnam in I want to say in '69, and I had this crush happened in the I want to say in the 69, 70 year, my sophomore year of high school. So, anyway, make a very long story short, my mother divorced my father, and she had married a man who wanted to move to Arkansas, and so my mother moved all of us children, all 6 of us, to Arkansas in the middle of the Ozark Mountains. So that's kind of hard to have a relationship or any kind of relationship with someone.
Yeah.
So I started over, which wasn't anything new because being a military brat, I have the typical syndrome, military brat syndrome, where relationships really only last 18 months because then your parents are picking up and moving. That's very classic of that time. So I had a real tough time with relationships in those days. I knew I was different. I knew I didn't want to be like my mother, but my mother was amazing. She could do anything. But at the same, she could sew, she could cook, she grew a garden, but she also had a serious mental disorder. She was bipolar. In those days, they called it something else. This was in the 70s. She had some serious mental issues, and which led to, being the oldest daughter, and my mother had me right before she turned 17. I was, there was a lot of conflict between us. My mother was 5'10". I was 5'6" at my height, but she was amazing, and I wanted to be just the opposite of her, which meant I did all the things. I followed my father around like he was a god, and then when my mother divorced him, I was crushed, and so then I ended up in Arkansas, going to a school that I did not know anybody at, and going from California in 1970 to one of the most progressive high schools with a class of 1,000 in my graduating class, to a high school that had 34 people in my graduating class was definitely culture shock for me. Because all of my friends, their parents were professors at Fresno State or at Berkeley, or they were because it was a very progressive school. Although it had a lot of military kids there, because the base was right next to the town, it was still very progressive, and we're talking about the end of the 60s. So we're talking about, Haight-Ashbury was over, they still had sit-ins. We're talking about 1970 when it was, you wore Nehru jackets and you wore these flare bell-bottom pants And I moved to Arkansas where that was not accepted behavior for a female. But I never fit that mold, ever. And my mother didn't require me to fit that mold. The one good thing my mother was, having mental issues, but being the kind of free spirit she was, she let us be whoever we were. I think she understood that I was different. I don't think she knew why I was different. But in those days, I was 5'6", little redhead with short red hair at the time. I don't know. I didn't think that I was full of myself, but I'm pretty sure that my family thought I was full of myself. When I finally came out to my family, after my mother died in 1972, or 73, in 1973. I went into the Army in 1972 to avoid conflict with my mother. I didn't know why I was drawn to the military, other than the fact that it was honorable. My father was had just retired from the military, had just come home from Vietnam in 1972. I graduated from high school, and 2 weeks later, a week later I turned 18, and a week after that, I was on a plane to Fort McClellan, Alabama, to the Army. I ended up being the youngest person in my company out of 250 women. They were all in their 20s, and I was 18 years old. In my platoon of people, my group of 30 people, I was 18, had just turned 18, and everybody else, the next youngest person was 25 years old. So I had to grow up very fast.
Did you go into the same branch as your father?
No. My father was Air Force. He was a flight engineer navigator. He flew planes in Vietnam. And he worked with his hands because he was an aircraft mechanic. I went into the Women's Army Corps. I tested out. I was always smarter than I seemed. Testing-wise, I always tested out very well. Nobody ever told me that you weren't supposed to try very hard at the exams that you take for the military at the AVCRAT. So I maxed the AVCRAT exam because I'm very good at test taking. I've always been very good at test taking. And so then they offered me a truck driver. In those days, it was a big deal. Women wanted to be truck drivers. I didn't want to be a truck driver. I wanted to be a psych tech. And because of the problems I had at home, I thought that was perfect for me. So I went to, and I was still only 18 years old. I went to McClellan, Alabama, to Fort McClellan. Then because of my age, I was still very young. I ended up at Fort Sam Houston in September of 1972, and went to psych tech school. First I went to what they call medic school. In those days it was 91 Alpha, and then I became what was a 91 Foxtrot, which was a psych tech. I worked on the psychiatric ward at Silas B. Hayes Army Hospital at Fort Ord, California, when I graduated 5 months later. So in 1973, I was at Fort Ord, and my mother died in March of 1973. So I did not stay in the military very long because, and that's a whole different story, but needless to say, I was honorably discharged with an immaturity discharge. for lesbian tendencies. It's a very, very kind of, and then that was in 1973. Fort Ord was going through their quote unquote witch hunt, and a lot of lesbian or gay women found themselves trapped in the system. They might get discharged because they broke curfew or something happened, but the main reason they were being discharged was because they were gay women. I made the mistake of falling in love with a woman who ended up in officer candidate school, and that was my very first relationship. And instead of disclosing who she was, I chose to not do that. And so, because I was a psych tech and my mother had just died, the mental hygiene clinic that they sent me to recommended a honorable discharge with for immaturity, and they let me go home to be supposedly go home to be with my family because my mother had just died. My mother died in March. I was discharged in September. And I immediately went to where the second lieutenant that I was in love with, immediately went to where she was stationed, and we lived together for 6 years. She's kind of the reason I ended up in the valley, because she's from Porterville. And so I ended up eventually going back into the reserves. I belonged to a unit in Bakersfield, and then one of the reasons that I ended up in Fresno is I ended up transferring to a unit in Fresno, and of course we're talking about 75, 76, and then I was in a Bakersfield unit, Army Reserve unit in 77. 78, I transferred to Fresno to a communications company here in Fresno, and that's why I was seeing my friend once a month, because I stayed at his house when I came up here for Army Reserve training once a month, and then and then eventually that's when I stayed here, and that was in 78 and 79. Kind of a roundabout way. I have since retired from the military. I retired from the Army Reserves. And then now you don't say you retired from the Army Reserve. You say you retired from the Army. I was in the military for 39 and a half years. I retired in 2014 on my 60th birthday. They kicked me to the curb, so to speak. And then so I've been in the military almost my entire life, but I've also my life is very compartmentalized. I'm in the military 1 weekend a month, or I'm in the military 3 weeks in the summer, or however long. In the end of my career, I spent a lot of time on active duty because because of what I did in the military. But I retired as a Army First Sergeant. That's an E8. I did a lot of different things in the military, but that's kind of how I stayed in Fresno. I belong to Army Reserve units here in Fresno and in the Bay Area mostly, Camp Parks and San Luis Obispo, or Fort Hunter Liggett, those surrounding areas. But I was an Army Reservist, so I was a part-time soldier, they would say. And then when I came to Fresno, I had been at Porterville Junior College for 2 years, and I had made the mistake of writing an article, of doing a project in my sociology class that had to do with interracial marriage. And we're talking about 1975, 1976. Interracial marriage was still taboo. It wasn't so much taboo in the military because black men had married German women, or while they were stationed in Germany, or Asian women when they were stationed in Japan or Korea or Okinawa. But so I grew up with that being okay, even though I went to high school in Arkansas. So I did my paper in sociology on interracial marriage, and you had to do a survey. So I surveyed all of the staff at Porterville Junior College, Community College in 1975 and they filled out a form, confidential form. They filled out a confidential paper. Then they filled out the survey, and when they got the survey, they didn't know what the survey was about till they had agreed to take the survey. When they took the survey for interracial marriage, they were like, what's happening? And then that's when someone outed me at the college. and I, so by the time I moved to Fresno, I had decided that I wasn't going to be in the closet anymore. That if I couldn't live my life outside the closet, I was not going to live in that town. So I moved up here with my friend, with his partner and him, and I came to Fresno with kind of a vengeance. I was not going to be in the closet. And that's how I got involved in the Gay People's Union at Fresno State. That's how I got involved in Dignity at the Gay Catholics Organization. And then there was the Imperial Dove Court de Fresno. It was in its sixth reign, or the tail end of its fifth reign and the beginning of its sixth reign. And I got introduced to Les Gatewood, who is an amazing man, but he's really kind of the father of the gay community organizations that are in this town. His dynamic personality galvanized the community. Of course, there was the Briggs Amendment, which was, gay teachers. We were all, going neighborhood to neighborhood, door to door, campaigning against that, asking people not to vote for it. And I was part of that group. But still, it was 1979. I was 24 years old. And I was a very young 24 years old. So, I think about those days, and I've been thinking about it in anticipating this talk. It was very easy for me to become embedded in the gay community. My whole social life, with the exception of that one weekend a month that I was an Army reservist, and I knew gay people and lesbians or gay women in the Army Reserves, but we just didn't talk about it because whatever we did, we had to excel at. But it was very easy for me. Here's my compartment. I'm Army Reservist one weekend a month or 3 weeks during the summer. And the rest of my time, I'm a gay woman in Fresno, and I am out. I have a job that allows me to dress any way I want. I was a job coach for a nonprofit organization here in town. I went around places and helped adult retarded men work in various industries, dishwashers or display helpers at Kmart. There were a lot of Kmarts in those days. But that's what I did for a living. And so it was real easy for me to be out. And I was out of the closet. I was one of the very first members of the Speakers Bureau in those days. And I was, with a vengeance, not going back in the closet. That's one of the reasons why I'm a gay woman and not a lesbian. Because I could not embrace the National Organization of Women, who wanted the Lesbian Rights Committee to be in the basement of the Now House. I couldn't. I couldn't. I know that those women were like me, but at the same time, they were very much not like me. I was so adamant that I was, and at that time, I was a lesbian, and I associated. But then at that point, I made this decision in my life that I was going to be a gay woman. That being gay was an inclusive term, not an exclusive term, and so I embedded myself in the gay community with a vengeance. I like I said, I became the facilitator at Fresno State's Gay People's Union. We had potlucks at my house. We had a fruit booth at the vintage fair, and we sold sticks of. And we're talking about 1970. We're talking about 1979. We're talking about 1978, 1979, 1980. We had a booth at Vintage Fair and sold fruit and had a huge sign on it that said the GPU fruit booth. Now, that was, you couldn't have got any more out than that. We sold strawberries, shortcake, and pineapple on a stick. Two things that I am deathly allergic to. But I was there cutting strawberries and cutting up pineapple because we were making a statement. Of course, and we had the vintage days and we had the big booth, and then they wanted you to put your booth in the free speech area so you could be there, and they burnt the sucker to the ground. And we're talking about the 1980. It was not a safe environment. We're in the middle of the Central Valley. But I was bound and determined I was not going to go back in the closet, which made me a little adversarial to. I didn't want to be adversarial. I wasn't trying to be adversarial, but I think I came across as adversarial to other gay women who were not so much out of the closet. At Fresno State, you could be out at Fresno State, but you still had the guys in their cowboy boots and their cowboy hats, and they were in the free speech area, and they were screaming at the top of their lungs, anti-gay slogans, and didn't want us on campus, and we were there, and we were not going home. Now, this was before the "I'm queer, I'm not." That was a derogatory term in 1979 for a gay man to call him a queer. That was before Queer Nation. That was before. Queer Nation was probably the late 80s, maybe. Jeff would have more information on that. But because I wasn't going to go back into the closet, and I was willing to go to classrooms like at Fresno State and City College, and wasn't afraid to be out and talk about my lifestyle and talk about being a gay woman. I became kind of like Jeff is the most out and visible gay man in our county now, in this area, because of Community Link. I was very much the out lesbian in the 80s. Because of Les, I got involved in the IDC, the Imperial Dove Court. I liked building things, and so I built sets, and we had very artistic people in that organization, and they taught me lots of things. And so I volunteered. I volunteered at community theater, and I built sets, And the lighting guy taught me about lighting, and I was willing to learn about whatever it took to put a production together. And I did. And so then I became the person in our community who could do that, who did that, who enjoyed doing that. And I was the go-to person. I was the fix-it person. I was the person who you could, if something broke down in the middle of a fundraiser, you didn't go to the chair of the fundraiser. You went to find Cindy Williams because she could get it fixed in a heartbeat. And I became that person.
So you're the one that always stepped up.
That's one of the reasons why Jeff tags me and says I'm the reason he's that he is who he is. I laugh because Peter Robertson says the same thing. I came from the fiber in me was you do what you have to do to make it work. And because I was so adamant I was not going back into the closet, then I needed that cushion. I needed that community to succeed. And so I became the person who could do that. And that's why, hold on just a second. Peter Robertson gave me something at the hold on. Actually cleaned house. So. It's a light board that has a saying that I always said that had to do with commitment. It says, do what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to be somewhere or donate something or volunteer for something, then you do that. It's not just stepping up though. It's has to do with honor, and it has to, that's that very military thing for me. It has to do with, to me, had to do with being a gay woman, being the kind of person that I am, which why it made me very successful in the military and somewhat successful in our community. In 1980, I'm Emperor 9, so I was the first elected woman of the Imperial Dove Court. I was probably one of at the time, one of 5 women that were elected to head their organizations in various cities across the United States in the court system. The court system is an international system that raises money through the art of female impersonation or impersonation, because it was also male impersonation. That raises money. It's a 501c3 organization now, but in those days we were just becoming that. The IDC, Les Gatewood was Empress then, and we anyway, I ended up being like 3 years later being emperor. But my start was the Gay People's Union at Fresno State. I don't know where to go from here.
Not a problem.
No, I just kind of, I want to say, let's see, 79, 80, 79, Les Gable was empress, and he called a meeting of community members at the Circle, which was the bar over here on Maroa, of community members who he wanted to start, because we had just had the Briggs Amendment, Briggs Initiative that had either was they were trying to pass it or it was just starting. Can't remember if that was in 78 or if that was in 80. I want to say 8. My instinct says 80, but it may not have been 80. We can check our facts on that one, but the Briggs Initiative.
Was that here in California?
That was the ban that if you were gay or if you were a teacher and you were gay or lesbian, or you knew that someone was gay or lesbian that was a teacher and you were a teacher, you could lose your job. That was when Anita Bryant was in Florida doing her Anita Bryant was a big beauty queen for the Miss America pageant. She was doing her Anita Bryant publicity stuff, and she was on the in those days you didn't have 500 television channels on your TV. There was no cable. But she was on the nightly news all the time drumming up support for the Briggs Amendment or for whatever amendment it was, and she happened to be in Florida, but they were trying to do something similar in Florida. But we're talking about in the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s. Anyway, I became involved in the Dove Court. Les called this meeting with people. There were a lot of people, not just court members, but there were a lot of community members and bar owners that came, and people who didn't even go to the bars came. And at that meeting, they talked about what do we need as a community. We had already had a community center at one time. Now, I really wasn't involved in that, and I don't know a lot about it. I understand it was on Belmont somewhere, but I don't know a lot about that part of the history pre-1979. But anyway, at the meeting, it was decided that we really need the Fresno Informer was the first gay newspaper, and it had folded. I want to say that Larry Norton, I'm not sure if maybe he was at this meeting. I can't remember if he was at this meeting or not. He was the person who did the Fresno Informer. That was the very first gay newspaper in Fresno, and he's kind of a prodigy of Gay People's Union at Fresno State also. So are quite a few of the leaders in our community we are now in our 60s. What did the community need? Well, we wanted a newspaper, and they wanted a community center, and they wanted a political organization, and they wanted this, and and there was all these things, and they had this big board, and they were putting up all these ideas, and it was a very inclusive kind of group. And that's when they started the Front Runner. That's when the Front Runner started. But before they did that, a group of people decided they wanted the newspaper, so they formed the Front Runner. And I didn't really get involved in that until late in the mid '80s. But then they decided that they wanted an organization that would be a community center or would be a resource. Excuse me. So they started Gay Resources Organization. And Gay Resources Organization was supposed to be an umbrella organization, and we were going to get tax exempt status, and we were going to put all these organizations underneath it. But what happened was, I believe that the state of California would not allow us. Oh, there was a very big division in the community of political, who wants to be political, who doesn't want to be political. And that was about the time that the IDC became a nonprofit organization. Grow, the people who were in Grow really wanted it to be a political thing. They wanted to have speakers, and they wanted to have monthly meetings and bring people down here and do, have a big speakers bureau, and they wanted to have, and that's where the speakers bureau was out of originally, that I did all the speaking for, was out of Grow. And we would raise money for candidates, or we would raise money to fight, to pay people to pay gas to come down here to help us from San Francisco. I think we helped pay for a bus to bring one of the organizers against the Proposition 2, I want to say it was. But anyway, the Briggs Amendment. But there was a group of people who did not want to be that political. And I kind of fell in that group. I didn't really want to be political. I just wanted a community. I wanted to feel part of a community. And being political, I really didn't feel like I could be political because I was still in the Army. And I had that problem. And I wasn't going away. I wasn't getting out of the Army. But I liked everything that I did. I loved everything that I did with, because the IDC let me run lights. They let me build sets. They let me, people in the, we would sew costumes, and I had this creative outlet that I could use. And so that's when a group of people decided that they didn't want to be political, but they wanted a community center. So they're going to let Grow be Grow and have the Speakers Bureau and bring speakers to town and have meetings at the Unitarian Church or wherever they were having them, because we would book a speaker three times a year, and they would come, like I want to say Harvey Milk came to one of those speaking engagements. I want to say he did. I want to say somebody else came too. The man who was on the city council after him. Not Archuleta. Anyway, so in those days, so that's when Gay United Services was started. Gay United Services was a 501c3 that ran the community center. And so we raised money, the IDC and various groups, we would raise money, and we put money into a fund to buy a building. And out of Gay United Services, about the same time that Gay United Services was about ready to open the community center again, some people kept saying, no, community center won't work. Gay United Services, then we had the AIDS crisis started. And the front runner was our newspaper. It was being run out of Grow. And Grow was kind of dying back. This was like in the mid-'80s. And so the front runner moved under the hospice of Gay United Services. And then a committee started that wanted to start a hotline. So Gay United Services had a hotline you could call, and we funded a hotline. So you had to have a room for the hotline. So we had a little office, and that became the community center, although it wasn't very big. And then the AIDS crisis happened, and that hotline, that gay hotline, became Central Valley AIDS Team's hotline for AIDS issues. But in those days, it was taboo. AIDS was like, and it was in the beginning of the epidemic. They really didn't know what it was. They just knew that gay men were dropping like flies. So Gay United Services morphed into Central Valley AIDS Team. And then Central Valley AIDS Team sort of morphed into, and all this time the Imperial Dove Court's raising money for all of it, all of it. I remember one year we raised $10,000 for muscular dystrophy, and that was before the AIDS epidemic. And once like 3 years in a row, we raised massive money for muscular dystrophy, because we had fundraisers for them. We had skating parties and all kinds of stuff. And then the AIDS crisis happened, and we decided the group that was with Gay United Services, and I was the fundraising person for Gay United Services. We decided that we needed to keep our money a little closer to home, so we stopped funding the muscular dystrophy, and we started funding our own community center, and in that time started funding a outreach. I want to say an outreach work coordinator or what, with money. I don't think they had county money in those days, but eventually they got county money, and they had the AIDS team that that had the hotline, and they also had I think they helped with food pantry kind of stuff. This was before they even had food banks and stuff like that here in town. So so that was kind of the infancy. Out of all of that, Community Link was born. I was involved in the very beginning of Community Link. There was a split with Central Valley AIDS Team, because Central Valley AIDS Team, although it was a project of GUS, Gay United Services, Gay United Services was about the size of was about 10 point on the banner, and Central Valley AIDS Team was like 120 point on the banner. So, it would say a project of, at the top, a project of Gay United Services, and then Central Valley AIDS Team. Gay United Services was where the 501c3 was at. Anyway, it sort of morphed, had some political issues, had some personality issues, had some all kinds of things. I wasn't really involved in it at Gay United Services in those days, because my emphasis had totally moved to the Imperial Dove Court. And at that time I had, the front runner by that time the front runner, I had inherited the front runner for 2 years, and then I got somebody else because it was not my forte. I did not want to do it. I knew everybody. I could get ads. I could sell you snow cones to Eskimos, but I could not. That was not my forte. Writing was not my forte, and so I got somebody else to run the front runner, and then they folded the front runner. The Gay United Services decided it wasn't viable, and so I knew it was folding. I went to two women that I thought would make good candidates to run a gay newspaper. They, in essence, agreed to do it, and when I went down to when it came time to put your money where your mouth was, I found myself the only person standing in line to get a business license to run the next gay newspaper, and that's how the Q&A was born. We called it Q&A News, and I became the editor of the newspaper, and it was a sole proprietor. I owned it. Nobody told me how to run it. Nobody told me what to do with it. I sold ads to it. I ran everything I could find that had any lesbian or gay hint to it, or bisexuality. It didn't make any difference to me. I put it in that newspaper. And in those days, you had computers, but they were dot matrix printers, and they were, I remember our first computer was called a Moral, and it was a dot matrix printer, and we had to print it on the best quality, and then we had to photocopy it in order to cut and paste it to make the newspaper. Anyway, so because of that political outlay, I ended up having the Q&A, and Community Link ended up starting a little bit later. And then because we wanted a community center, and so then Central Valley AIDS Team became the premier AIDS organization in the valley, and was kind of taken over by. I wasn't really involved in it those days, so I'm not exactly sure. I knew who they were. I knew who the people were on the board of directors, but I wasn't involved in their decision-making processes. By that time, I was running the newspaper and was very, very involved in the Imperial Dove Corps and fundraising.
Would you say that? So you mentioned there was like you call it a witch hunt when you were in the army.
Yeah.
Would you say that was one of the main reasons that made you want to make sure that you stayed out of the closet?
Well, it started, but it was like a seed, but you have to remember, when I got out of the Army in 1973, my partner was a second lieutenant in the Army, active Army. And we went to our base that we were at, and she connected with other gay women at the base, and we socialized in our little clique with people, but we were not out. I mean, they weren't out. There was usually a very small group of them that would maybe frequent the bars occasionally near the base, because we were on the East Coast in those days. So we did a lot of home parties, birthday parties. Anytime there was a reason to have a party, we had a party. But I was 19 years old then. When I moved to be with my very first committed relationship, I was 19. She was 25. I was, and pretty much, I would say most of my relationships, not all of them, but most of my relationships have been with women that were 5 to 10 years older than I. Not always, though, because I've had my current relationship I've been in for 23 years. We met at the very first Pride Parade in 1991. I was, like the picture I showed you, I was 9 months pregnant with Elizabeth. That was the very first parade and festival. It lasted all of 8 minutes, the parade. I think it lasted, maybe 9 minutes. And then the festival had very little tonnage, had booths. We sold a little food. We had beer in kegs, and we had that was in 1991, the very first one. And
how did the community respond to that?
Respond to the parade? Well, the Klan was there. The Ku Klux Klan. We got a permit. We had a permit to have the parade. And right in the middle of our parade route, because the parade route, this was really funny. I say all of 7 minutes, 9 minutes or whatever the parade was. The parade route was from Weber and Olive, which is where the big DMV station is at now. But in those days, the DMV was still there. It was a huge parking lot. We assembled everything. Everybody assembled in the DMV parking lot because it wasn't chained or anything, and they were closed. Because it was on a Sunday in those days. Because most of the people who were involved in some of the organizations worked on Saturday. They were hairdressers and art people. They had to be open on Saturday. So we had it on a Sunday. It was, so we assembled there, and then the festival, and I wasn't really involved in the parade. Jerry was. That's Elizabeth's dad. He was one of the one of the parade coordinators. We had male and female co-chairs in those days. He was the male co-chair of the parade. I was the female co-chair of the festival. And we were, I was pregnant with Elizabeth, 9 months. She was due any minute. I was going to show you that. They had at one of the dance clubs, they had those squares to pick when they're going to be born and whatever. I recently saw it, that they had it at the C's Dance Club. That was over on Weber. And to decide what day Elizabeth was going to be born on. She was actually born on the 20th in 1991, but this was in 1990, the first Sunday in 1991 in June. And here I am at the festival site, and it was in the parking lot, an empty field where it is now, but there were no fences, there were no charge, we had raised the money to have it, we got the permits, the city let us have it. Something tells me that Karen Humphrey was the mayor of Fresno then. I want to say that, but I'm not exactly sure that was true. We'll have to check our facts on that. She was a very progressive mayor, and so, they had some protests. Queer Nation had already started. The reason the parade and festival even started was because Queer Nation made it known that they were, by God, gonna march down Olive Avenue, which in that time was the quote-unquote gay mecca, although there weren't any gay bars in the Tower District. But there were lots of gay-owned businesses in the Tower District in those days. And Queer Nation said they were going to protest and they were going to march down down Olive Avenue to celebrate Stonewall. And we had been talking about it at Gay Resources Organization and consequently at the Gay United Services meetings, we were talking about it. And we were talking about the Imperial Dove Court meetings. And so a group of people got together from those three organizations and decided that if we were going to do a parade and we were going to celebrate Stonewall, then we were going to do it right. And so we got permits and we did all the stuff we had to do. And we thought, everybody's going to participate, it's going to be great. Because we had all been going to San Francisco or Hollywood. We had floats, we had award-winning floats in San Francisco that I helped build for like 3 years before that. And so everybody was excited about it. But when it came time to put your money where your mouth is, the parade, they had this huge 2-mile route, and the parade actually lasted 7 minutes. Maybe 9. Jeff would have the figure, because he would know, because he was around in those days too, because he was part of Queer Nation. And we had the festival site, and the festival sold beer and sodas. And that's how we raised the money to pay for the permits and to pay for all the expenses. I'm trying to think. I showed you the pictures of the very first one. Here I am in a big oversized shirt and my little sandal, my little Zoris. And, I'm 9.5 months pregnant with Elizabeth, and people who had not seen me in months, who did not know me, who had known me before, did not know that I was pregnant. And that whole having a child in the gay and lesbian community was kind of the beginning. We were one of the first couples to do that. We were the first couple to actually get married, and that was because I wanted to know I did not know who my real father was in those days. The man who I talk about as being my hero is my adopted dad. I did not know that when I was little until I was about 12. And then he adopted me at 14. But he was still my hero, so it didn't really change anything. But I wanted Elizabeth to know her dad, and Jerry and I had decided to have a child together, and so we also got married. I lost every female friend I had when I did that. They came to the wedding, they drank the booze, but they would not have anything to do with me. I was literally ostracized by all of my lesbian friends because I married the father of my child. Why do you have to do that, was their thing. Well, it had to do very personally with me and very personal to him. And we knew that when we had her, we were creating a family. He was single at the time. I was single at the time. My next relationship was my relationship with Patty. Elizabeth was not quite 4 when we got together. So, anyway. The catalyst for me staying out of the closet was what happened at Porterville Community College. When I just wanted to live my life. I just wanted to be who I was and not be ashamed of who I was. And when the school came to me and said, and I got decent grades. I mean, when the school came to me and said that I had offended the clerical staff at Porterville Community College with my paper, and somebody outed me on the thing, then it was hard for me to, go to school. It was hard for me to be motivated to go to school. I had a job in Porterville, and I worked full-time, and I went to school full-time. And I thought, well, okay, I have 3 semesters. I really don't need 4 semesters. I can just go to Humboldt State. I want to be an architect. That's what I want to do. I'm just going to go to Humboldt State, because Humboldt State had kind of the tree hugger kind of community, and I thought, okay, I'll be fine. I'll be there. And I went to see my friend here in Fresno and got sucked into the community of Fresno. And it's not like I don't have roots here, because my great aunt was here. I have family here. I had cousins. But I didn't, I spent some of my summers here with my cousins that were on the west side. So I did feel connected to Fresno somehow. My mother was born in Crothers. So I just I think Fresno sort of sucked me up, kind of. Or I felt like they just kind of embraced me, and I felt welcome here. I did not, however, feel welcome in the women's community. That might have been me, because by the time I got here from Porterville Community College, I was out. And I had no qualms telling people. And in those days, queer was not, it was a derogatory term you used for gay men that straight people used. However, the gay community was trying to embrace that term and make it their own. And so I think I was at a function and somebody asked me what I did for a living, and I said, I'm a career queer. And the whole room got quiet. Now, granted, we were in somebody's home. It was kind of like mine, where you see the openness, and there was probably maybe 40 people in the house, but the whole room got quiet. And it was full of lesbians. I was like, what? What did I say? So, and like I said, that's when I made the conscious decision that I was really not a lesbian. I was a gay woman. I was a member of the Fresbians, which are Fresno lesbians. Jeff is an honorary member. I was a member of them in the very, 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 very beginning of them. I have the T-shirt. I said I went to this concert. I have the T-shirt, kind of thing. But
So you mentioned that the Klan showed up to the Pride Parade?
they did. They did in full force. What they got was a permit to have a square. There was an empty parking. There was a parking lot that we weren't allowed to use on the parade that was in the Tower District. And the Klan got a permit to congregate there. And so here we are in the middle of the parade, and this happened a couple of times. But in the middle of the parade, here's the Ku Klux Klan. I was like, eh.
So what happened?
Nothing happened. Well, they that was not the time that the person took the Klansman's hood off of him and got arrested. That was the next year. The first year we the first year they were there, they were shouting, they were, and of course Queer Nation was a very radical gay organization, and they were like right on the other side of the sidewalk screaming and yelling at them the same way that the Klan was yelling about, and they had their little signs. And they had signs. Go home kind of thing. I want to say Jeff might have some pictures of that. I don't have pictures of that because, as I said, I was at the festival site, setting up the festival site, so I didn't really see that. Now, I want to say that it was the next year. Was it the next year? I was involved the next year, but I wasn't involved the third year because... Was I involved the next year? I was involved the next year because Elizabeth would have been 1. No, I was not involved. I was not involved the next year because my Army Reserve training required me to be out of town for the entire month of June. So I couldn't be involved in the second one. That I remember that now. Because I drove from Klamath Falls on the border, just on the other side of the Oregon border, all the way back to Fresno to be here for Elizabeth's first birthday. So that was in 92. So I wasn't involved in the second one. I was kind of involved, and I really wasn't involved in the third one because that was the year I was a Grand Marshal, I believe. I was either the third Grand Marshal or the fourth Grand Marshal. But I want to say I was the third because the third Grand Marshal was, I was the Grand Marshal because Elizabeth rode with me, and she was not quite 3. She was fixing to turn 3. And of course, by that time I had met Patty, but we hadn't connected yet. We had my current partner. And I don't refer to her as my wife because we are not married. It's not that I was in the military and I was afraid to get married. It really wasn't an issue. Our family know we're together. Her grandsons are my grandsons. Her granddaughter's my granddaughter. Her son was 16 when we got together. Elizabeth was 3.5. So, I remember, I want to say it was the second or third one, that we had somebody in a pink Klansman outfit marching the parade. He wore, and the Klan was there, in their little square, and the guy wore, his face was not covered, but he had the pink Klan's hat, pink robes, and walked in the parade. I want to say that was the third. I want to say the second one was when the kid took the Klansman's hood off of him, and he was arrested. I want to say that was the second year. The reason I say that is because we had to raise money to bail him out of jail. Because we didn't, because he was actually here visiting. I want to say he was here visiting somebody else who was part of the parade. But
So when you were in the when you served in the army, so you mentioned that a lot of the women, especially the ones in your platoon, they all were really hoping to be like the truck drivers.
when I went into the Army in 1972, it was a really big deal in the recruiting command that women could finally be truck drivers. Now, what was funny is they were truck drivers during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
They were airplane pilots in World War II. They were Jeep drivers in World War II. But now, Korea and all they even drove Jeeps and trucks in Korean War. But no. But to be officially, which is now called an 88 mic, I'm not sure what it was then, but to get that MOS, no. They were clerks who worked for the company, who were clerk typists that just happened to be driving the truck. Or they were supply sergeants who had to drive the truck. They weren't really truck drivers. And in those days, that was when the Army was modernizing. And so they were getting bigger trucks, 2.5-ton trucks, 5-ton trucks. In the course of my career in the reserves, I was a truck driver, an official licensed MOS 88 mic truck driver, because I thought it was kind of cool, and I went one of my annual trainings. I went to truck driver school, and I volunteered. I volunteered for every duty they would let me have in the military, just like I would volunteer in the gay community. And both of my careers, my military career and my career in the community, have paralleled each other in the sense that I'm the same person both places. Sometimes I had long hair, sometimes I had short hair. Right now I'm growing my hair long only because I'm protesting people wanting me to get it cut. I'm not but when I graduated from high school, I had hair down to my waist. I was going to show you a picture of that. And the week after I graduated from high school, for my 18th birthday, I went down to the beauty salon in my town of 4,000 people, got my hair cut, and I reported to duty because I knew I was going in the Army. And my hair was about 2.5, 3 inches long. And it went from waist length to that. My sister cried when I got my hair cut. But I've had long hair, short hair, whatever. Because you can see in the picture, when I'm pregnant, my hair's growing out. My hair's growing out, and when I met Patty, my hair was long. Immediately after that, I got cut. Because she really liked me in short hair. I was going to show you something. This is a picture of me in 1979. This is me. These are my buddies.
Oh, wow.
He's one of my buddies. That was me in 1979 at Camp Roberts. Camp Roberts.
Off limits to all male personnel. Was that like a
women's barracks? That was a women's barracks, and there were signs on all 4 walls. All 4, where both ends and both sides. Big sign on the side. Yeah. Yep. And that was me in blonde hair and red hair. And then this is me. Elizabeth had to have been about 2. And she's not in the picture, but that's me because I recognize that picture. That was Jerry's in my house. And that's a picture of Elizabeth on the back. Her very first picture. See her? Yeah. Jerry always gave me big portraits of Elizabeth. I probably have a dozen of them. This is a picture of him. She was She was about 6 months old, 7 months old. That's our very first house.
And is this Jerry in the photo?
That's Jerry. This is also him. This is him. And that's his lover at the time this picture was taken. But that's...
Oh, wow.
And that picture was taken, I want to say... That picture was taken in our house. Because we owned a house that had 2 master bedrooms. Had a big master bedroom suite upstairs. And Jerry lived upstairs. And it was an addition to our house. We didn't build it, but we bought it when we bought it right after Elizabeth was born. And when I say we bought it, I mean him and I bought it. We used my veterans loan and his credit, and we bought the house. We had 2 criteria that we needed. We needed 2 master bedrooms. He lived upstairs, and when Stephen lived with us, he lived upstairs with Stephen. Or Stephen lived upstairs with him. It was a huge, that room was bigger than these 2 rooms together. It was an entire wing of our house.
Oh, wow. That's,
yeah,
that's
and
huge.
it had, you walked up the stairs and there was like an office area, and then the huge bedroom, and then the wall had 17 feet of glass mirrors was his closet, and then you went over to the side and there was his huge bath, walk-in bath. But anyway, he lived upstairs and I lived downstairs. I lived in the master bedroom that normally comes with a house that has a little tiny shower and a little tiny bedroom. And then Elizabeth's room was across the hall. And then my office for the Q&A was across the hall. Because I ran the Q&A out of my home. But anyway, that's him. And that, okay, see this dress?
Yes.
This is the same dress. And that's him in the same picture. And these are about a year apart. This was taken right before Elizabeth was born. And this was taken when Elizabeth was about 6 months old. And that's him with Elizabeth. She's about a year old in that picture.
And was this picture taken at the bar on Moroa?
This picture was taken at this was taken at the Express because that's Herb Fisher. He was the owner of the Express at the time. That's Herb Fisher.
Oh.
That's the reigning emperor at the time, JB. He's since passed. That's Herb Fisher, who owned the Express, and that's. I have to look up again. Yes, that's Jerry. Jerry is a triplet.
Oh, wow.
So in his story, he will also be interviewed. In his story, he may talk about that. But he is an identical triplet. They're triplets. They're identical. Now, you can tell them apart now because he hates this, 70. But he doesn't look 70. But now, did you get a chance to, didn't she talk to you about interviewing 1 and 4? Did she talk to you about somebody, you interviewing 1 and 4? Somebody called 1 and 4?
I don't think.
Well,
that
you're
was
not.
me.
I know
Yeah.
you're not, but
Yeah.
I thought she talked because she talked to me about you interviewing 1 and 4. This is 1 and 4.
Oh, wow. And that's Empress 1 and 4, right?
Yeah, Empress 1 and 4, Jessie. And we all refer to her as 1 and 4 because she's the first and she's the founder of our organization. And when I say short, that's usually how short my hair. My hair is usually shorter than that. Actually, I usually have a crew cut. So yeah, and then that's Jerry's and my official photo when we were Emperor and Empress. We were Emperor and Empress together.
Oh, wow.
So this was taken, I want to say, in 83, 84, 83. Let's see, Tiffany was 80.
Is that Tiffany Taylor Tate?
Yep. She was running something to the 80s was their big theme, Ready for the 80s. Will Rochelle is her emperor. He has since passed. Was one of my best friends, and he at the time, and he So I've known Tiffany since the beginning of Tiffany. But anyway, so Tiffany was the seventh. Doug and Mona. Doug is at the time was Jerry's partner. Jerry and Doug ran together as a couple, and Doug was elected and Jerry was not. The first female empress, Mona Jenkins, she's no longer with us, but the first female empress of Fresno was Mona Jenkins. She is Empress 8. And then Jerry and I are Emperor and Empress 9. And we are known as 9. People talk to, if someone calls across the room and says 9, I turn around. Jerry doesn't, but I do. Because I know that they're, and every time I went somewhere, I always had a shirt that had a 9 on it. You know how you can buy those soccer shirts that have the numbers right here?
Oh, yeah.
I always hunted for the 9 ones. I didn't care who wore the shirt. I just needed the 9. So, yeah. So, yeah. Well, I've already told you about Elizabeth. She calls board meetings boring. They're called board meetings because they're boring. She was constantly at board meetings. You missed the last Christry meeting, but one of the other people there had their daughter with them. And she was over there coloring, and I looked at Jeff. As I walked in, I saw the daughter coloring, and I looked at Jeff, and I said, deja vu. Because that reminded me so much of Elizabeth. She would be sitting on the floor next to me on the chair, coloring or playing whatever little Etch-a-Sketch or whatever she was doing. Anything else?
I have a question. I'm assuming that when you were in the army, that you weren't out.
No. There were people that knew I was gay, but I sort of kind of confused them in the army because I had Elizabeth. Now, when I had Elizabeth, I had already been in the army, I don't know, 14 years. But like I said, sometimes my hair was long, sometimes my hair was short. I didn't start wearing my hair really, really short until after Elizabeth was born. Well, no, I did wear my hair short a couple times because I got in trouble for it. Because I really got in trouble for it. Because the sergeant major thought I was a guy and thought I had too long hair. And when he found out I was a woman, he said, your hair's too short. I thought, that's a double standard, but, you know. But I kept my military life and my personal life very separate, and only for about 5 years right before Elizabeth. Not the year before Elizabeth, but right before that, between between 85 and the beginning and 89, I had a big overlap between the two of them. Now, I was not that as involved in the community. I still was the stage manager at productions, or I was still the lighting person, or I was still building sets. But I was more in the military than I was in the community because I was on active duty. I spent 2 years in, let's see, I have to kind of figure it out. Tiffany was 80. Doug and Mona were 81, 82. Jerry and I were 82, 83. So Jerry and I stepped down, I want to say, in 83. And in 85, I went on active duty here in town on a special project for 2 years. And that meant I wore a uniform 5 days a week. Sometimes I wore a uniform 30 days a month. But So I went to functions, or I would be the lighting person. I might set up a function, but I wasn't, and I might attend meetings, but I wasn't involved in the day-to-day kind of stuff. Because in our community, it's like going to school. You go to school Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Well, maybe you work, or maybe you go to school Tuesday and Thursday. You have all your classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or you have all your classes on Mondays and Wednesdays. But the rest of the time, you're either trying to make a living, figure out how to get your car fixed, all those kinds of things. So there was lots of time in between, even as activists, between the functions and the parades and the meetings. There was lots of times that, like a month goes by between the equestrian meetings. Do you think about the equestrian in that month's time? Not very much. You're thinking about where are you going to have for lunch, how are you going to put gas in your car, what your mother wants the next weekend because you have to go home. You're thinking about a jillion other things besides the equestrian and its requirement. But when it comes usually a day or two before and the day after, you spend quite a bit of time thinking about it. And that's how my life was lived. My life was lived very compartmentalized. When I was in the military, I was 190% in the military, and I usually went away somewhere. And so I was indoctrinated, and I was up to my ears in military. And no matter, and women had to be much better at it than men. To get anywhere, to get any kind of recognition, you had to be twice as good.
Just to get a seat at the
Just
table.
to get a seat at the table. And I wanted a seat at that table. And so I worked very, very hard in the military. Just like I wanted a seat at the table in our community. And I worked very hard to keep that seat and get that seat. Because there was a lot of testosterone in the room. It might have been a lot of drag testosterone, but it was still a lot of testosterone in the room. But, and I was always the devil's advocate in those rooms. Okay, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? What happens if, have we done this? Have we saved enough money? The reason that the organizations in this community that have contingency funds, they have them because of me. Because I was so adamant. Because when Jerry and I reigned, when we started our reign as Emperor and Empress, the court owed money because his partner had stepped down as emperor, and they were two of the most loved people in our community. And that people went to their functions, and he was a theatrical major and she was high in our community. She was on the board of directors and the co-chair of Great Gay United Services. Doug and Mona were very, very popular, but they gave away every cent they raised. And so when we took over, in 1992, we didn't even have enough money in the account to pay for the venue. We didn't have enough money in the account to pay for the liquor we were going to serve at the venue. So in the first couple of events that we had a pool party, or we had this, or we had Jerry paid for the liquor, or he paid for the venue, and I paid for the liquor, or I paid for I'd pay for the ice, and I'd pay for this, and he'd pay for the food. Whatever, we were doing it. We were paying for it because there was no contingency fund. So one of the first things I did was make the courts put aside $1,000 a year. Every reign had to put $1,000 a year away. Now I don't, and so that the next reign would have seed money that they could borrow from to start with. They would pay it back, and then they would have. It wouldn't be like us. When Patty was emperor, she's a past emperor of Fresno. The year before she was emperor, we started the lighting fund because we were paying thousands and thousands of dollars to people for lighting. And there were at least 6 of us in the organization that knew we did lighting at the community theater. So we knew lighting. We just didn't have any money. We didn't have any lights. They were all at the community theater. And we couldn't take them down at the community theater. So we started, and we had an electrical engineer who was on Patty's Court. He was a miracle singer. And he helped us put together the lighting, and the core IDC owns thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of professional lighting equipment and big boxes to store them in and cart them around so that they can be wheeled up into trucks. That happened during Patty's reign. She's the 25th emperor of Fresno. I'm the 9th. She's the 25th. But I mean, those are the kinds of things that we did because we thought about the future, not just today. And it is about the future. It is about not so much a legacy, because I never really ever thought about it like that. I never thought about that. I only thought about the continuum. How is this going to continue? How is the festival and parade going to continue in 5 years? Now, maybe it won't be needed in 5 years. But a celebration of Stonewall can still happen. It may not be a pride event. We may not need a pride event because maybe we have evolved in the next 10 years or 5 years that we won't need to march with floats down the to the festival site on the first Saturday in June to proclaim our gay pride. But we can still have a celebration of Stonewall. That's what pride is. Our pride parade is a celebration of Stonewall. 50 years.
So I saw in one of the photos that you were showing me, there were police officers down at the parade.
Mm-hmm.
Now, were they invited? Were they there as a...
They were there to keep us from getting unruly. They were there to protect the community. They were not there for us. In the beginning, they were there, in the beginning when the Klan was there, they were there to protect the Klan. They weren't there for us. I remember the first parade. I didn't really see it. I only saw the pictures of it. But the Dykes on Bikes from San Francisco came down, and a motorcycle contingency of lesbians from Fresno joined them. There were 30 of them from Fresno. There were like 40 of them from San Francisco and the Bay Area came down. They rode their motorcycles down. They had a big party the night before. They, at one of the bars. We had a barbecue for them. So there were like 60. I'm going to say, that could be probably, an exaggeration, but lots and lots of motorcycle people. But that was the extent of the parade. I mean, there were a few floats, but like I said, it lasted about 9 minutes. And the parade, the festival, we had speakers and entertainers and stuff like that. But they weren't there to protect. They weren't necessarily there to protect us. Now, Jeff Robinson has done a phenomenal job with Community Link in establishing and organizing and getting the community to stay organized for our Pride events. The Parade and Festival is just one of several, but it is the biggest one we have. We now have corporate sponsors. My daughter recently asked me, Mom, does Jeff check the corporate sponsor, the people that corporate sponsor his parade to see if they have gay and lesbian health insurance for their gay and lesbian employees in their contracts? I said, no, Elizabeth, I don't know. But I'll ask him. And he said, yes, they do. The corporate sponsors that sponsor the parade and festival are very pro-gay in their businesses. Now, I wouldn't say that downtown Atlanta's Walmart is very pro-gay. But I can tell you that the corporate office has a division that's a pride division for their workers. I know that for a fact. I know that because I have one of their little buttons from the Walmart, the corporate office. So I know that that Walmart supports the gay and lesbian workers that they have, as much as they support every other worker, because their workers volunteer for other things, and they do, tree stuff. They plant trees, or they clean up parks. And their volunteer hours. They do, Kmart employees. Walmart encourages their employees to do that. I don't know that much about Walmart's political environment of their employees, but I know that the people who attend the Pride Parade, it's usually the largest contingency from the Walmarts in the Valley. It's organized, but it's not all, they're not all gay and lesbian people, but they're people and friends and family that support gay and lesbian people. So, but again, my whole thing is about continuum, and that's why I'm a part of Queer Street. That's why I'm on the committee. That's why I'm a researcher, because I think the stories in this community are fascinating, very unique, and I heard someone say there are no queer people in Fresno one time. And I laughed. I was in the audience. When not a city council person, but a person running for city council said there were no queer people that lived in his district. And I wanted to laugh. Then you don't know your district is what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are queer people everywhere.
Oh, yeah. And there was queer people before...
Before we were ever called queer people, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know a lot about the history of gay and lesbians and gays in the military. I don't know a lot about that history. I just know my history and the people that I know. We were so busy being soldiers, and being soldiers, that we knew about each other. Sometimes we socialized, but not usually. Again, it's really hard. The stereotypes in our society will only let one smart woman be in a group of men. Only let one rise to the top. You can't have 4 really good ones. They only let one of you be good. Only one of you can be the star. Only one of you can be the first sergeant. Only one, we can only have one woman first sergeant of a communication company. We can't have 2 in a row. Oh no, we can't do that.
So it was really hard just to be considered like a promotable then.
It was hard. We had to be just as women. I remember, I belonged to a communication company here in town, in the Army Reserves. Now that communication company had satellite dishes, and it had people who climbed up towers and ran telephone cable. They were called cable dogs. They had switchboard operators, and in those days they had teletype operators, because that was a microwave, something you could send over a microwave, and you could, and it was a teletype operator had to operate the teletype. You could not type more than 22 words a minute. Only 22, no faster than 22 words a minute. And you typed it, and it punched little holes in a paper, and the paper would go through the machine. And we're talking about before IBM, We're talking about a 1977. Okay. 79 when that picture was taken I showed you. We were at a, I want to say, we were doing some kind of exercise where we had, in those days we had microwaves. Microwaves were a big deal. We had these big 5-ton trucks that we drove that had these big boxes on the back of them. And in the top of them was this big dish. And you would go and you would open the dish collapsed, and you would open the dish and you would bolt it together. And then you would go inside of it and you would crank it up. You would lock it in place. And then you would aim it, and you had a thing inside of it up at the top of the thing that you could put it. It was like degrees, and you had a paper that told you how many degrees, whatever you were doing. And then you would have another. Now, if you were doing it at Camp Roberts, you would have one on one big hill, and you'd have another one on a big hill. And we shot a satellite. We shot a microwave signal from San Diego to Fort Lewis, Washington, with these between these trucks. Companies went all out. They got on the top of mountains. They got their little dishes up. They plumed. I was in the one that did one of the ones at Camp Roberts. I was the teletype operator. That meant I was the person who typed the thing. But I also had that MOS, 72 Echo. But I also had the 72, I was also the microwave, the 32 Juliet. And I was the 72 Sierra. I was the microwave satellite operator who drove the truck, put up the dish, aligned the dish, ran the computer, and in those days they had little punch cards and stuff like that. And we shot the dish, and we thought it was great. We drove over there late. We left Fresno. We drove to we drove to Camp Roberts. Another platoon of us, another truck thing, went to 100 Liggett, and we shot from 100 Liggett's like by Salinas, or between San Luis Obispo and Salinas. And so we were at Camp Roberts, which is just the other side of San Luis Obispo, and we got on our hill and we shot a signal between there and 100 Liggett. We thought that was the greatest thing since peanut butter. Never been done before. And that was in the early 70s, late 70s. But people would have had a fit if they'd known that the primary people in that company were the 3 women who ran everything. There were 3 of us we excelled at everything. There were probably 20 of us in the company. Out of the 20 of them, 3 of them were sergeant majors. I was one of the first ones to make E7. I didn't make it in that company, but I made it. I made E7 before any of them did, but they all made sergeant major because I didn't want to be a sergeant major. But there was a handful of 3 to 5 women who pretty much did that mission and were responsible for that mission in a group of 20 guys in the whole company. But we had to have a switchboard. We had to have, we were going to send a message from the commander at Camp Roberts from his office. We ran a telephone line from his office to our switchboard to one of our radio rat rigs, which is a big box on the back of a 1-ton truck that has a radio. It's a radio operator, teletype operator. And we sent the signal to the other rat rig that was next to me, and it sent a message to my little satellite, and then my satellite sent it up and sent it to 100 Liggett, and then it went down the other way. And we thought that was the greatest thing since peanut butter. But great achievement. Never been done before. Who got awards for that? The company commander, the first sergeant, the platoon sergeant, the 3 squad leaders that were men,
But not the women.
but none of the women got recognized. Oh, our team chief, he got recognized, but none of the women got recognized for that. But of the 9 of us, there ended up being 9 of us. 3 moved to the truck company, became truck drivers, transportation 729 truck trans. I moved to the battalion, the transportation battalion, and one female stayed. There were other women, but of the group of us that did this mission, she ended up being a sergeant major. 2 of them ended up being sergeant majors. They retired as sergeant majors in their career. One of them, I think 3 of them were master sergeants. But if we were ever in one unit, only one of us could be successful, because we weren't allowed to all be successful. But we were. We kind of supported each other. We tried to support each other. We were so busy trying to do what we did to the best of our ability, so we could be the cream at the top. I remember one time I got sent to, this had to have been in 77, because this was, maybe it was in 79 when that picture was taken. I had been hurt at one of the annual trainings, and so I had dislocated my shoulder, and I couldn't do my regular job and my regular civilian job, and so I was having to go to Lemoore for physical therapy and I couldn't drive. So when I finished that year, there was like, what are we going to do with you? We can't do anything with you. You don't fit into the company anymore. Because when you're gone for a year, you kind of fall out of the sink. What do? So I asked to be transferred to the battalion, and they would not transfer me. So I volunteered to go to every school that would let me go. They would let me go on the weekend, and I would do it instead of going to my unit. So I did that for a year. Well, I went to what they call pre-developed, leadership school, and I graduated honor grad. And then I went to the BNOC course, and it was another 6 or 7 months. And over the course of 3 years, I went to every course they would send me to and graduated top of my class. Could not get a promotion to E6. My company would not promote me. And they sent me to everything they could send me just to keep me out of their hair, because I wanted to do it all. I wanted to be, They sent me down to, all these NCOs had to go down to this training at 400 Liggett. And the 101st Airborne was sending in their troops, and sending in their trainers, and we were going to train us in small unit maneuvers. And there were about 30 women that went out of this whole group of the 63rd RSC, out of 300 men and 30 women. And so we went. There was a 5-day mission. We did these trainings. They broke us down into groups. We had these team leaders, and then we did night patrol. And basically, they were teaching us how to be how to do patrols, and how to do small group maneuvers, and how to ambush people, and how to defend against an ambush. And women weren't allowed in combat, mind you. We're talking about, this is like 80s, in the 80s, late 70s. Maybe 79, 80. Out of 300 people at that thing, the 2-star general was going to give an Archon to the grad. I got the Archon. But I ran my ass off for 5 days. I got very little sleep. came back to my unit, and they would not promote me, would not send me to the board, would not send me to the E6 board. I said, just let me put my packet together. I had my packet's all together. Would not let me go to the E6 board. And luckily, one of my BNOC instructors became the sergeant major for the battalion that I was in. And the first thing he did was walk upstairs and handed a list to the commander of the communication company and to the commander of the truck company and said, I want to know where these 7 people are. And I want to know why they're still E5s. And there were 3 of them. Of the 7, 3 of us were women. And I want their packets at the next promotion board. And the sergeant major, and they did. They said, okay, they drug us in there, okay, you have to go before the board, whatever. I had the flu. I was sicker than a dog. And I went to that promotion board. I was gray. The sergeant major said, and of the 7 of us, there were like 30 people in the promotion board putting their packets for. All 7 of us got promoted. All 3 women got promoted to E6. Now what do you do with them? They have to be platoon sergeants. They have to be squad leaders. They have to be. Our units didn't want to make us that. They didn't want us to be squad leaders. They didn't. We were team leaders. That's the highest we ever really got. I think one of the 3 of us finally became a platoon sergeant as an E6. But they said, no, that's enough. That's enough. So I got transferred to the battalion. I asked the sergeant major, can I come to the battalion? He said, what job do you want? I said, I want a promise. I'll come to battalion and I'll work my ass off. You can give me any, I had 3 positions I was qualified for. I said, give me any 3 of those positions. I don't care. I just want you to promise me that the minute I am eligible to go before the 7 board, you will have the commander put my packet in. The battalion commander put my packet in. We had, they had company commanders. Whatever. You promise me you do that, and I'll do whatever you want me to do. And he made the promise, and I went down there, and I was the NBC NCO, and I ran the nuclear, chemical, and biological defense for the whole battalion, and I did that for 3 years. But the end of my first year, I was a special operations on active duty. That time period, I was doing the active duty, and I was on active duty. Special assignment, and I was in an E7 slot, and I had sat in it for over a year. And all you had to do, and that time, all you had to be was in the slot, doing the job for a year, and you were eligible to be put before the board. You didn't have to find another job. They would just promote you and put you in that, and you get to keep your job. And so my friend upstairs, who was the unit administrator, she was wonderful. She helped me get my packet together. She put my packet together. I went and got my picture taken. Her and I drove it out to the commander. Well, I don't know if we should put it in. I handed her the letter from the sergeant major that went with my packet. Oh, I guess we better sign this then. And she signed it. We drove it down to the promotion board the next day. That night, put it in the packet, the deadline. And I was the youngest E7 that the battalion had ever had. I got promoted to E7, and I didn't even have 10 years in the Army. Active duty years. But I worked my ass off. But there was an E6, a woman who was in my unit that was an E6, and she worked her ass off too, but they would not give her the recognition that she needed. And finally I said, you know what? Take this position. Go to the sergeant major, take this position, and in a year, they have to put your packet in. And so I spent time mentoring women and telling them, okay, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. No, don't let that get you, There weren't a lot of mentors. No one mentored me. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And the woman upstairs, who was the unit administrator, knew her stuff. And she friended me, and she helped me put my packet together. She also put my E8 packet together 20 years later. And I made E8. But yeah, so I've done a lot of things in my life. I'm a little kind of disillusioned with the Army only because, it's, I think a lot of people, but when it comes to our community, to me, the most important thing is the continuum, like we talked earlier. Ensure that there's a continuum. And I don't think that we can plan for our future if we don't know what our past was. And not so much for me, but we're losing some valuable resources in our community. That's why I agreed to take the training to become a researcher, because I think that we're, like you can tell, I know how to talk, and I just have to learn how to just ask the questions and let them talk, like you've done. So have you found it been very difficult?
No. I'm really enjoying everything. I felt particularly pulled towards your military background because I actually have a friend. We've known each other since middle school, and she's actually in the Army right now. I was the first one out of all of her family and friends that actually went up to visit her at base.
Oh,
And she was stationed up at Jaber in Alaska.
Oh, kind of cool. Very cool. Yeah. So is she in the Army?
Yeah, she's in the Army.
Cool.
I believe she's a specialist. She just earned her promotable
status.
Yep. So she's trying to become, I forget what the next step was.
Sergeant.
Sergeant.
Yeah.
So she's trying for that.
So has she talked to you about PLDC and going to training schools, leadership training schools? Yeah. They're hard. They're nerve-wracking. It's stress. They're trying to put as much stress in a week or 2 weeks as they possibly can to mold you. And that's a good thing about Army people. They deal with stress very well. Until we go to combat. And then when we come back from combat, we're not, which I did. I went to Iraq in 2006 to 2008. I'm very proud of my service. Not convinced that we needed to be there, but that's not the issue. The issue was that was my job, and I did my job. I was a nurse over there, and in education. I think that the Army trains you to deal with crisis. That's its whole purpose. To deal with times of war, to deal with crisis management. And I think that's something that people sometimes need to learn. And when you've been to a combat zone and mortars are flying over your head and they're dropping 12 feet away from you, when you get back home, whether or not your hair is fitting in your beret is not a crisis. It might be a crisis to a sophomore in high school. And that's what I had to deal with when I came back. But, since I've been back from, I haven't really been that involved in the community since I came back from Iraq, other than the Quistry thing. I haven't really found a project that I was a little bit involved in the IDC, and I'm still a little bit involved in that, and I'm a little bit involved in Community Link. And my partner has been the parade coordinator for, 20 years practically. Well, no, I don't think it's been that long. 15 maybe. We'll have to ask Jeff how long Patty's been doing it. She's been doing it. I haven't been doing it. Her and Elizabeth did it. I was always gone in June doing my Army training. At least most of the time. Anyway.
So going back to your upbringing, so you said you were raised Roman Catholic?
Well, no, I actually converted to be Roman Catholic while I was in basic training at Fort McClellan. I went to you have to go as a group. We're talking about 1972. And women. And you're on a base that's full of women. And they have these assemblies. And and the only time you can really go anywhere not on the schedule, or you're not shining shoes or ironing things or whatever, was to go to church. And so I went to this church thing, and it just happened to be Catholic, and it was a catechism kind of class, and it was like going to confirmation classes. It was confirmation classes. And so I went, and while I was in basic training, I converted to Catholicism. Now, I am not Catholic. I was not really Catholic then, but I converted to Catholicism because of that. I come from a Southern Baptist background. My father my adopted dad is from Texas. His father was a big deacon in senior deacon in a big Southern Baptist church in Texas. And when they say big churches, our house sat in their choir loft. I mean, that's how big these churches are. And we're talking about this is in the 60s, 68. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Pentecostal minister, converted to Pentecostal in the I want to say 43. Yeah. My family lived here in Fresno in those days. My grandparents owned 100 acres at Walnut and Manning Avenue, which is West Fresno. And in the 40s, my grandmother farmed, and my grandfather was a machinist at Hammer Field. And this was like in 41 and 42. So that's why I know a lot about Fresno's history, because I lived with my grandparents for 3.5 years. And when I was in middle, like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And so I would listen to my grandfather talk about, Hammer Field and the Stockton Shipyard and stuff like that. And then my grandmother's my grandmother's sisters married men from the valley on the west side, and they were farmers on the west side. And we're talking about from in the 30s and the 40s. So I knew a lot about that history because my grandmother, I went to family reunions and they would talk about it, and my grandfather would talk about Hammer Field and how because he was a machinist and he could fix anything. And that's kind of where I get that fix anything kind of gene. Because my mother could do that. My mother could make anything, could take an old shabby coat, adult coat, and cut it down and make it into a child's coat, and it would be magnificent, Taylor couldn't have done a better job. How she fed 6 kids on a staff sergeant's salary in the 60s, I have no idea. None. But I didn't really recognize my mother's struggle as a mother until I was pregnant with Elizabeth. And it wasn't until recently Patty bought me for Christmas last year the DNA test from Ancestry, because I did not know who my biological father was. And my adopted father, who is Williams, he died last year, and I didn't feel it was I didn't feel right about searching for that. My older brother knew who his father was, but I did not. And my mother died before she had a chance to tell me. And none of my family really knew. It was kind of a shock when I found out who he was. It's not that I did not know him. I had met him, but I was too young to really, I was like in the 4th grade when I really met him. And that was the only time I ever met him. My grandmother let him take me to dinner one time. But I don't remember anything really about that. So I come from that, so that revelation when I did the ancestry, and the circumstances were revealed, kind of how my mother, how this man became my father. She was in the middle of a divorce. It was before she married my adopted dad, but before I was born, and I didn't realize her struggle until I did the ancestry. And bipolarism runs in my family. I have 2 brothers and a sister. One had it really bad, 2 of them had it minor. And my mother was bipolar, and we're pretty sure my grandfather was bipolar. Just looking at the kind of behaviors, things that he had, the ups and downs, the manic and then the depression that would come after the manic stages. So because of that, I didn't really, so I've had a new revelation about individuals' struggles and how they deal with depression, how they deal with family, because I recently found out who my biological father was, and that he lived across the street from my grandmother for almost 30 years. So my family knew him. My grandmother, however, did not know he was my father. I do not think she knew. Anyway, she never told me that was the case. A lot of things molded me, but like my adopted dad, he taught me to be proud of who I am, regardless of who I am. And you would think that a retired military Vietnam veteran would instill that in a female child. But what he did was, he gave me skills to fix things and do things, and treated me like an equal. And I was a little kid. He treated all of us that way. Now, he didn't have a tremendous ambition to be anything other than what he was. My brothers don't appreciate that. But my father, he tried to see the good in everything that happened. The situation. He tried to make the best of every situation. And he could dance the socks off of you. He didn't drink a lot in his later years, but he smoked and drank. He didn't smoke in his later years either. But he did smoke and drink when he was married to my mother. And he had his own demons with Vietnam. Like I said, he had now it's either the Flying Cross or the Silver Star, or no, because he was a flight engineer navigator, he could have got the Flying Cross, but I think it's a Silver Star that he has. Because they showed it at his funeral. There was a big picture of it at his funeral. I think my sister has it. But he was very proud of me. I do know that. He did not want me to go to Iraq, but he didn't really have a say in that. So, because I was over 50 when I went.
And was he ever aware of Patty?
Oh yes, he loved Patty. He loved Patty. His second wife, my stepmother, did not want me to tell him I was gay, because and that was one of the things that estranged me from him and her. It was also one of the reasons that he left her. Because when I was going through all the stuff at Porterville, I would go home on the weekend. They lived They had moved from Texas to Vacaville, outside of Travis, and he. I would go every other month and go home and visit my family. And because I didn't have a lot to do with him after my mother died, I had younger brothers and sisters that went home to live with him after she died. I was already in the military when she died, so I really didn't have, my relationship with him was based on my young years, from the time until, before I was in the 4th grade, because I went to live with my grandparents in the 4th grade. And then I didn't start living with my mom and him again until they came back from Japan. So it wasn't until 66, I want to say. 66. So, but he still was my hero. He still was the person that I strived to be. But I didn't really know him very well as an adult. But he knew about my lifestyle. After him and my stepmother divorced, my sister and my youngest brother had their 21st birthday. So this had to have been in 80. Had to have been in 80. 81? 80. 81, yeah. We went to a birthday party, and I took my lover at the time with me. And basically my family said, tell me something we don't already know. I have a brother that's gay. His husband and him live in Idaho. For the longest time, he wouldn't tell me. My whole family knew I was a leader in the Fresno gay community. My whole family knew. He would not tell me he was gay. And so he lived a life of, I'm a bisexual, for, 15 years. And finally gave that up. But him and his husband they've been together for, I think, 7 years, but they've been married a year, 2 years, 2 years. But he very much led a gay lifestyle during the 80s. Dangerous times. Him and my brother, just younger than me, were bartenders at one of the hot gay discos in Palm Springs during the 80s. Not a good time. My brother, just younger than me, he's definitely straight. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about him, but my brother younger than him. And now he's very happily married. But my family, except last summer, it wasn't last summer, so it was 2 summers ago, we all went to, when I say we all, I mean my family, met in North Fork, Colorado, which is the very beginning of the Colorado River. And my youngest brother is a full-time RVer, him and his wife. And my brother, just younger than me, is a full-time RVer. They're both retired. And then James, my brother that's between the two of them, he's the organic farmer in Idaho. And then my youngest sister, she lives in Florida. We all met in South Fork with Patty, and Patty had just had major surgery, so they were all very careful, very careful. We have a travel trailer, you'll see it in the driveway. We drove it to North Fork, Colorado, and spent a month. My family, we went fishing 3 times a week or more, ate fish 3 times a week. Patty didn't really like fish, But and then the next year, my dad died, and then we went the next year with my brother and David. Did James come? I don't remember James being there. No, it was just David and his wife and Patty and me and my brother Carl, or Brad. And then so we see each other quite frequently now. We didn't see each other for a long time. They would get together, but I didn't have the financial means to. And in the summer, I was always doing Army training, or I was with Elizabeth. So it wasn't until recently. I mean, we made trips. Like we went to Texas one time. When Patty and I first got together, we took Patty's 16-year-old son and Elizabeth, and we all flew to Texas. Because everybody at that time lived in Houston. And so we went to Houston. Everybody congregated at my sister's house in Houston. And then, but my family has known my entire life. When I was in basic training, I didn't know what it was called. I hadn't really acted on it actively. But when I was at Fort Sam in 1972, I was still 18 years old. But my friends were all 25 and older. So because you're with the group, they'll let you, in those days they didn't give a crap about carding you in a club. So I went to the club with them. We all took a cab from the base. Told the guy we wanted to go one place, and then when he got off base, we told him we wanted to go somewhere else. I mean, that was 1972. I don't remember there being any men in the club that I went to in San Antonio. And I only went there a couple times. Because I was a student and I was too busy studying and too busy doing things. But I did have my first, that was when I actually came out and knew what it was called, and didn't really like the term lesbian, but that was in 72. And it wasn't until I moved here in 78, 79 that I decided I was a gay woman. I liked that term and felt it was inclusive. Because you were either queer or you were a lesbian. Those were your choices. And I kind of liked the word gay. I liked that it was inclusive, you know. Could be a gay man or a gay woman. Anything else? I think we about covered it.
I mean, yeah, we've talked a lot.
Yeah.
What was I going to say?
Does it tell you how long it's been?
Looks like we've talked about almost 24 minutes.
24 minutes? No, 2 hours. Or 24 minutes? Is that what it says?
No, that has to be wrong because it says 3:35. We started at 1.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, well, we'll hope. We'll see what it says.
All right.
Okay.
Would you like to go ahead and call it a day?
Sure.
All right, let me go ahead and stop this.